Hey guys, Quiff the Lazy Geek here, and today we're going to talk about some exclusive details and information I got about the new Radian Telescope Raptor 61 scope from Radian Telescopes, which is a brand basically owned by OPT, Oceanside Photo and Telescope, of which I am an affiliate, although I am very much independent in my own assessments. Now this telescope, the Raptor 61, is a very wide field telescope with a very fast focal ratio of f4.5. It was presented by Trevor Jones of Astrobackyard, and immediately there was a lot of feedback, almost backlash, almost outrage slash controversy slash, and probably that's the closest term, tempest in a teapot, about that telescope versus another telescope which I have next to me, which I've bought not long ago, which is the Sharpstar 61 EDPH2 telescope. Because we looked at the Radian telescope and we thought like, this looks strangely familiar, and it looks very, very similar to this telescope. And so the overall narrative was like, wait, I'm pretty sure this is a rebrand, and why is the Radian Telescopes rebrand version so much more expensive than the Sharpstar? And I myself weighed in on the issue in a recent video, which I'm putting a link to above. But long story short, after I posted my video weighing in on this issue, or maybe debate, or maybe Charlie Foxtrot, whatever you want to call it. After posting that video, which, for me it was posted automatically at nighttime Japan, so that it actually is posted while it's daytime in the US. So it was 2 a.m. for me, but not too long after I posted the video, I got contacted by people from OPT, and especially Dustin, the CEO of OPT. And since I am an OPT affiliate, meaning in my description, video descriptions, I have affiliate links to products sold by OPT, who are most of the time not brands from OPT, but just like other vendors, Optolong, Ioptron, whatnot. So yeah, I got that phone call really, and I was like, interesting. What are we going to talk about? Let me hide behind the telescope there. But actually, the phone call was really to give me just a lot more details about the Radian Telescope product and how it differs from the Sharpstar offering. And the first thing that I'm going to address, because it's really the easiest to address, is the electronic focuser. So the part that really drives the actual mechanical focuser of the telescope to achieve focus on your camera. You can see here I have a ZWEAF electronic focuser, which is a very cheap and decent, it's okay. I called it in an earlier video a hot piece of garbage. It's not quite the case, but it's not a Rolls Royce for sure. It's serviceable, and it costs $200. And we saw that Radian Telescopes was offering their own focuser for their Radian telescope, and that focusing option was $500, so more than twice the price of a cheap solution like the ZWEF. So I was very curious about like, okay, but why? What's the difference? And I learned that the focuser from Radian Telescopes is actually manufactured in partnership with Optec. Now, if you don't know Optec, they're basically one of the Rolls-Royce manufacturers of focusers and rotators for astronomy, astrophotography. They do a lot of other products as well, but they have a reputation for extremely high quality. I've personally never used an Optec product, but I have used other high quality focusers like from Moonlight. And when you say excellent focuser, when you ask like what's an excellent focuser regardless of price, you typically get answers that are Moonlight and Optec. So Optec, even though I've never used them, I have a high image with about them. Just that, the fact that the Radian Telescope focuser is made by Optec, it makes me like go like, oh, okay, so that's why it's expensive. And when I asked like, why did they choose Optec for their focuser? Lots of good reasons, from high resolution of the focuser. Yes, Optec is well known for that. Excellent software support with ASCOM, Indy, and X2. And also the fact that it does not need a separate controller, which is something that Moonlight focusers do need. loved my Moonlight focuser, but I was not happy, that's for sure, that I had to drag a cable down to a controller which had the USB port, and then I had to drag down a cable from the controller to the computer. Obviously, it's not the case for this ZWEAF. You have a USB port directly on it, so it's the same as the Radian Telescope focuser. But still, you know, it's nice to have that. And the focuser is lighter, and the focuser has a clutch, meaning you can actually install it in a non-invasive manner on your telescope, and you can also basically unscrew or untighten that clutch to use the focuser mechanism manually. Now, is there something that the high quality of the Radian Telescope / Optec focuser would bring to the table versus a cheap, lower quality EAF focuser? I'd say if you have poor seeing or low resolution, like big pixels, probably not that much. But if you have good seeing and you care about star shapes and you like everything to work all the time without issue, and you know you have good resolution because you have a smaller pixel camera or whatever, then I think it makes sense actually to pay more for a focuser. And I'll be the first to admit that I've bought a Moonlight focuser before, even though there were other alternatives, because it's a Rolls-Royce. And if the Radian Telescope focuser ends up also being a Rolls-Royce of focusers, which if it's made by Optec, and it is, then it should be the case, then I completely understand that $500 price point for the electronic focuser. Whether you can understand that difference or you want to buy that focuser instead of the EF, for example, or other solutions because of those arguments is completely up to you, but you know, I completely get it. So the next point is on the telescope itself, and I got a lot of background information on the telescope, and long story short, it is indeed, as many suspected, based on the Sharpstar 61 EDPH2 platform. Now, despite that, it is not indeed a straight rebrand. The development time apparently was around 7 to 8 months. They started with Trevor's basically list of specifications, or wish list, which was basically a well color corrected triplet, high focal ratio, wide field telescope with high quality optics that would be almost like a Takahashi Baby Q that will work for full frame cameras very decently. And the telescope, we should not care about whether it can be used visually at all, and they can only focus on astrophotography. And one of the things as well that was part of their wish list was basically a lack of flexure. And flexure can, if you've done long exposure astrophotography, especially with a Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope, and a guide scope attached to it, you can know that flexure can cause issues. So they started from that. They apparently talked to around 15 manufacturers, and there's not an infinite amount of scope and optics manufacturers, especially when you talk about optics. There's not a lot of manufacturers around the world, so it's not like they can pick and choose from a lot. But they ended up looking at Sharpstar, and at the time it was not the Sharpstar EDPH2, it was a doublet. It was the Sharpstar 61 EDPH version 1. It was a doublet telescope, and so with the reducer, when they first tested it, they saw there was a bit of chromatic aberration that was left. And they actually tried to design a filter that would try to kind of cut off these color aberrations and get like much better looking stars. They didn't get something that was up to their standards. But then, of course, as we know, there is now the version 2, the Mark II of the telescope, that is an actual triplet telescope. And really they are using, for the optics and the tube itself, as well as the mechanical focuser, yes, they are using the telescope that is manufactured by Sharpstar. They apparently are using the most premium optics that are offered by Sharpstar. I do not have more details on that, but you know, we know from Telescope Service, their own version of the Sharpstar rebrand, they advertise an FPL 53 glass. Whereas it is kind of guessed that the standard Sharpstar version has FPL51 glass. I'm not even sure whether that exists. I am not an expert in that, so I'm not gonna go into the details, but it does seem that Sharpstar indeed offers different ranges of optics for the telescope, and I am told that they chose the most premium optic. And again, it comes down to how much of a perfectionist you are. I tend to not be too much of a perfectionist because I know that being a perfectionist is really, really hard in this hobby. But others, we know from so much feedback on the forums that star shapes and star colors and halos around stars and all of that kind of stuff, it's looked at very, very precisely by a lot of people. And so I think it makes sense to focus on that. So yes, the glass apparently is the highest quality glass available from Sharpstar. Now, with that out of the way, so conclusion is, yes, it is based on the Sharpstar 61 EDPH Mark II, with apparently the highest glass available. Let's talk about what they changed from the telescope. Now, the obvious design change was the clamshell. If I remove the telescope from its support, basically we can see we have a clamshell type of design here, where you can, it's the telescope fits in there and you have a knob to close the ring there. The clamshell length is maybe 5 centimeters, a bit more maybe, I'm not sure exactly, I haven't measured it, but it's pretty short. And it works for me. It's okay, and it has two basically mounting areas that are very easy to access with threads. There's one here where I have my finder scope / guide scope attached, and there's another one with the default handle that comes with the clamshell design. Now, OPT, Radian Telescopes, when they were designing this telescope, they looked at the first samples that were sent to them from Sharpstar. They looked at the clamshell design and they thought the clamshell design was passable, but they could make it better. And this is where we're getting those rings and dovetails. And yes, the dovetail of this telescope, I showed it in the previous video, is super short, and it is absolutely impossible to balance the telescope with just that dovetail. So obviously they saw that issue, and so they went down with dovetails and with rings. Now, all of those accessories, by the way, and this is true for the focuser as well, is apparently made in the United States. So that's something to keep in mind. So one of the first things that Dustin mentioned was that he didn't like that, clamshells and rings, that the design has never changed, and they all have this knob there to attach to basically secure the telescope in place. And that knob can be a source of cable snatches, cable drags during the night. And yes, it has happened to me actually. So yeah, I completely agree there. So they wanted to get rid of that knob. They wanted to have rings so that instead of a clamshell, they have a longer area, a longer part of the scope to actually secure the scope onto for more stability and less flexure between the scope and the clamshell or the rings, because the rings will in the end carry the guide scope, and we all know that we want as little flexure as possible between a guide scope and the main imaging scope. So that's kind of like the impetus apparently for designing those rings and dovetail in the first place. And Dustin basically went over several advantages of the rings that OPT designed and manufactured and has manufactured in the United States. And they're all really like attention to details that, I really respect, and I really appreciate all of the explanation. One of these details is that all of the surfaces on those rings, which are not circular, but they offer actual straight surfaces, are mountable, both apparently with metric and what he called standard screws. And to me, metric is standard. Come on, you guys are just imperial stuff. But that aside, yeah, so apparently both are accepted. And also one thing that I didn't quite realize is the locking mechanism, which I already thought looked really cool, has apparently been designed so that it is a two-step locking mechanism. You have the first step that basically closes the rings but allows you to rotate the scope within the rings, and the second step, when you refix it down, will just completely fix the telescope in place. The telescope can no longer rotate, which is indeed pretty neat. And it's something I appreciate because, yes, I have noticed that if I don't tighten this knob very strongly, the Sharpstar telescope can rotate a little bit. So if their mechanism works as well as Dustin tells me, and you can rotate the scope when you want to, then close it down when you want to really lock it into place, and it's perfectly locked into place, then that's absolutely great. And in addition to that, in each of the corners, so there are four corners where you can actually run a cable in between the ring and the OTA, the telescope itself, so that you can run your cable to your dew heater, for example, or your lens hood dew heater that could be placed on the telescope. And that's also something I appreciate because, yes, the dew heater cable is actually one of the cables that always pauses the most, that annoys me the most, because I kind of like need to use a Velcro strap or whatever to tighten it around the scope, to fix it to the scope as cable management. So having that makes sense. So it is indeed, talking from Dustin, there's like a whole attention to details that really came through, and I absolutely respect that. Can you achieve the same results with the standard Sharpstar telescope with its clamshell design? Yeah, sure. But, you know, I completely understand how they try to take this design, make it better, and I do believe that objectively, if it performs as Dustin was explaining to me, they have indeed enhanced upon that. And it's an enhancement, even when they're small, this kind of attention to details, it has a cost and it has a benefit, and therefore it has a price. And that further justifies to me the price difference that we see between the Radian telescope and its Sharpstar counterpart. So I have absolutely no doubt that a lot of work went into the design of these rings, probably more than we imagine, even though, you know, but they're just rings, is the first reaction. It's my reaction as well. They're just rings. But yeah, it's still very much appreciated that they put a lot of thought into them. And I really like actually the fact that all of the surfaces are mountable, because even rings, when I see from Prima Luce, those rings, they're not cheap. And having the sides mountables as well, so you could have like an ASI air on the left side and the guide scope on the right side, and you could add a handle on the top, that kind of stuff. I think that makes sense. That's a good idea, and I'm all up for it. Is it worth the price differential? That's up to you to decide. Now, the dovetail rings is apparently not the only enhancement that they did to the scope in particular. There is also some enhancement that was done with the filter mounting system. Now, this is the reducer flattener that comes with some additions of the Sharpstar telescope. It basically screws into here, and then you can screw your equipment on the other side. And within that, you can actually remove the optics part of the reducer slash flattener. And in here you have an M48 thread that you can thread filters into. And apparently Radian Telescopes, OPT, when they tried this out, they noticed that some filters would basically not thread in the whole way due to how the threads were manufactured. And so you would end up with a filter that's holding in there, but that's not quite square to the incoming light rays, which can be a source of ghosting and halos. And again, it goes down to the attention to details, how much of a pixel peeper you are, and you know how much you like your star shapes and your star colors and your star appearance. And they asked for some changes there. I'm not sure exactly what changes were made. I am not a specialist in threads and threading and manufacturing, all that kind of stuff, but apparently they did something to make sure that filters would screw in properly and would screw in all the way to get the filter squared with the incoming light rays. And apparently one of the other changes they did was the thumb screws for the actual rotator of the telescope, where you can just like rotate the equipment without rotating the telescope itself. They apparently wanted to basically have like a much better way of fixing it down. They apparently used something called a high pressure thumb screws. I have no idea how it works. I'm not an expert in that, but they changed some things, which is, another thing, that's attention to detail. And it is true that with the Sharpstar 61ED-PH2, I have had reports from some of my viewers who contacted me, actually two, who contacted me about not great shapes in one corner or something like that after using the rotator. So if OPT put a lot of attention and care into making sure that this kind of issue doesn't happen with their scopes, then all the power to them. And still on the topic of this area of the telescope, the focuser itself, Dustin was very clear that they were being very severe and strict in terms of quality control. Like if the ratio isn't exactly 1 to 10 or 10 to 1, whichever order is correct, they would be rejecting that and not shipping that to the customer. And I think it goes into one of the soft stats that I had mentioned in my previous video, which is quality control. I do believe that quality control on those Radian telescopes will be higher than quality control on the Sharpstar. Now, in terms of the flatness of the field and the star shapes on a full frame camera, I think it's still too early to pronounce ourselves. We saw from samples from Trevor's work with the telescope that indeed in some of the corners, the stars were elongated. I'm not sure whether it is a spacing issue or something with the scope. I mean, I could probably try it with my own telescope now that I have a full frame camera. But then, I'm not super into perfect star shapes, so I tend to be a bit more cavalier about all of that. Dustin did tell me that in terms of the luminosity measurements that they had for the field, they have, he was saying perfect flatness. I know that people might not like that term, so I'm going to say extremely good sharpness, flatness of luminance of the field in APS-C and APS-H formats, and very good luminance flatness across the field in a full frame with something like 97%. So a small drop in the corners in terms of vignetting, which is I don't think we'll get anything that's much better than the Sharpstar itself, since it is sourced on the Sharpstar. So if you are interested in the full frame performance of the telescope in terms of the corners and the field illumination, I don't think the premium glass that Radian telescopes are using will make much a difference in that. So you could just check pictures using this telescope and see what they look like, and maybe expect that the results might be slightly better on the Radian telescopes version of this, simply because of the glass that they're using and the rotator design, the thumb screws that they have. I know it sounds still fairly nebulous in terms of the image quality itself, which is why I'm really thinking I really want to see some samples, some lambda users, normal users with this telescope, see what results they get out of it. And on that topic, by the way, Dustin told me that OPT would be shipping me for testing a review sample of one of the Radian telescopes. So since I already have the Sharpstar 61ED-PH2 that it is based on, I'll be able to compare the two and really see whether there's a big difference for me. And here we are in Tokyo. I have poor seeing and I don't have high resolution on my cameras. So if I do see a difference and if I do like the Radian telescopes version better, it will say a lot. If not, then it might not say much, but I'll see when that sample arrives. Obviously, they'll have their pre-orders to fulfill first, and they'll have to get it out first to the actual customers, but I am hopeful that in the end I'll be able to get a sample and test it. And we'll see what I get out of that. Of course, when I do report on that testing, I'll be very clear about any advantages, conditions, or whatever, any strings attached about that testing. There doesn't seem to be any at this stage, and Dustin actually stressed a lot that he appreciated my honesty a lot, and that he wanted me to keep being honest and that he would not put conditions on stuff like that. So I'll be allowed to tell my version of things, my opinion, without being influenced by OPT and Radian telescopes. So obviously this is further down the line and we'll see how that goes then. So in conclusion, How has my opinion of the Radian telescope changed after Dustin's call? So first, Dustin is an amazing speaker. He's super enthusiastic. I'm told that I'm very enthusiastic and my enthusiasm is kind of viral to my viewers, which is great. So imagine me on steroids. Like he really had this, like his charisma stat is off the charts. He might be wearing a magical charisma ring, so I might be under his spell, but probably not. But with that, with the explanations I got, like first on the focuser side of things, I mean, the moment he said partnership with Optec, I was like, oh, okay. Like that kind of like fixed it for me. Like, I understand why it's expensive. In real world, how much of an advantage will that give me? I am not sure. But I will be absolutely sure that if it's made by Optec, we know it's durable, the mechanics are good, it will be at super high precision and great drivers. So that's that. On the rest of the telescope, so just as we suspected, it was based on the Sharpstar platform. But that's, you know, as I was mentioning earlier, it's not a bad thing because the Sharpstar telescope is an amazing piece of kit. And they enhanced it on top. They made it even better. So we have the telescope itself. The glass is apparently the most premium glass that Sharpstar offers, whatever exactly that means in real world terms. But especially I was impressed with how he went into details in the rings design. The rings design is really impressive to me, and I really like the fact that I got so much information and that there seems to be quite a lot of value added to the rings themselves. It's not just new rings for the sake of having new rings and saying this telescope is different. It's really, there's a lot of thought and a lot of work and a lot of sweat and tears and sleepless nights that have obviously been put into this Radian telescope. I completely respect that, and I cannot wait to see the real world results on that telescope. Obviously, I haven't tested it. I haven't checked it up to now. I only have this additional information to share with you guys, so you have more information about the details of this Radian telescope version of the Sharpstar 6180ph2, and you know, hopefully that's going to be helpful. Hopefully this is something that you like. Hopefully it helps explain the price differential between the Radian version of the telescope and the Sharpstar version of the telescope. I am personally much more convinced now that I have gotten those details. And just like the quality control and like the rings, you know, if I had to buy a telescope again between this Sharpstar and the Radian telescope version, I'd be hesitating a lot. I might actually go for the Radian telescopes, I'm not sure, because knowing that you're not going to get a lemon, knowing that there's a high standard of quality control, knowing that those rings will not snag your cables, that's quite a big deal. It's worth money, and let's remember that we spend hundreds of dollars on ADM accessories, dovetails, and mounting materials, and we spend hundreds of dollars on rings as well. And yeah, when we put that into context, the price premium that I see of $350 from the Sharpstar to the Radian telescopes, depending on where you buy it, it's not that high. It is definitely a large sum of money, and I'm not saying like just go for it blindly. I'm just saying like it's understandable and it makes sense, and I get it, and then it's really up to the buyer to make their informed decision. And also I know that a lot of people were triggered by the fact that, you know, Trevor said that he designed this telescope, and they're like, dude, it's just a rebranded telescope. What the heck did you design? And you know, overall, I don't mind the description. I designed my dream telescope, or whatever the title of his video was, because yeah, they went with a set of criteria. They really went with, I don't know how you say it in English. In French, I would say a cahier des charges, a list of specifications that they wanted for their scope. They found the right manufacturer for it that would fill those specifications. They enhanced upon it with the rings, the mounting hardware. They made sure they had good glass for color aberration control. And Dustin on the phone was like confident that it was like basically second to maybe only Takahashi telescopes, and the baby Q was kind of their model for that, which is a very big, claim to make. And so in the end, I do understand that, not only did they put a lot of work in this telescope, they added a lot of value on top, and they effectively designed their specifications and worked with the specifications. So I'm not really triggered by the use of the word "I designed this telescope." Trevor, I've never met him or really interacted with him, but from all reports, he's a very nice and very detail-oriented individual. So I'm pretty sure that OPT probably suffered a bit from all of the details and all of the feedback that he probably gave them. Again, I'm kind of imagining stuff there. The phone call that he had at the end of his video, kind of like the comedic phone call that he had, it probably was not so far from the truth. So yeah, I get it. So with that conclusion, I'm still going to add something. You might be asking yourselves after watching this video, well, what Quiv said good stuff about the Radian telescope he has not tested, and he talked with the CEO of OPT, which basically makes that telescope. Is Quiv an OPT shill now? Has he sold his heart and soul? And the answer is no, absolutely not. So my goal was just to convey the information that was given to me by Dustin, the CEO of OPT. I do not own the Radian telescope. I do not know how well it performs. I'm giving you my opinion about whether or not, I gave you basically the tools to know whether or not that price differential that you're seeing is worth it or not. I'm not going to comment more on how the marketing for that telescope, for the Radian telescope, was done. In my opinion, it's brilliant marketing, it's very well done, and the product itself that's being marketed is very likely worth it. And it's like, as a side effect, I'm pretty sure that Sharpstar will see a bump in sales as well. And overall, more choice is always good for the hobby. And I'll make sure to give my impressions of the Radian Telescope Raptor 61 once I actually get my review sample from OPT. I already know that I'm very, very satisfied with my Sharpstar version. So I have no doubt that it will be at least as good. One thing though about this video is that since I am quoting a lot and basically paraphrasing a lot of what Dustin told me over the phone, I want to make sure that my facts are correct. So I will be running this video through Dustin before I publish it. This is not for censorship purposes. This is really so that he can correct any factual mistakes I made from the video. And that's pretty much it for this video. So I hope these new details straight from the horse's mouth about the Radian Telescope Raptor 61 have been useful to you. I hope you can make your own opinion about whether those enhancements on top of the Sharpstar kind of like base model are worth the price differential to you. And really, that was what I wanted to do with this video, give you those tools, give you this information, then it's up to you to make your mind about it. I personally don't see this Radian telescope as bad. I see it as actually really good. It's always good to have more choice and people can make their own informed decisions. And with that, that's pretty much it for this video. If you like this video, or if you have feedback, or you're angry about something and you need to get it out into the open, feel free to leave a comment down below. If the video was useful, you like this new information, feel free to click on this like button. And if you are new to this channel, welcome to the channel. This channel is about astronomy, astrophotography in general, lots of tips and tricks. I can go into a lot of technical details while being as beginner friendly as I can. So if you want to learn more about astrophotography or you want to step up your game, feel free to look at my past videos. I have a ton of helpful videos. And if you like this kind of video, feel free to also go down below, click that subscribe button, click that little ding notification bell next to it so you're notified when I publish a new video. And with that, as always, thank you so much for watching. Whenever you can, don't forget to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.